Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to the Killer Women podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air Global Network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Catherine McKenzie. Catherine was born and raised in Montreal, Canada, a graduate of McGill in history and law. Catherine practiced law for 20 years before leaving the practice to write full-time. An avid runner, skier, and tennis player, she's the author of numerous best-selling works, including Hidden, Fractured, The Good Liar, and I'll Never Tell. Her works have been translated into multiple languages, and Please Join Us and I'll Never Tell have also been optioned for development into television series. Woo! Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you.
Who doesn't love it's something about I don't know, as a writer, like the best words ever are optioned for television or or movies. It's like, of course, who doesn't want to see their stuff up there? So okay, I don't show us the beautiful book because I don't have my final copy yet, but I have
it today.
It's so gorgeous. So tell our listeners about Have You Seen Her?
So Have You Seen Her is about a woman named Cassie Peters who is leaving her life in New York. We'll find out why, obviously. And she's returning to Yosemite, California to work on the search and rescue team there, which she did 10 years ago. And she soon gets involved in the disappearance of a young couple that echoes a disappearance that happened 10 years ago that she also investigated.
And that's it. That's all. It's that's the carrot being dangled in front of you. It's a very good carrot. And I love the story and how things come together. No spoilers. Is super, super fun. So can you remember sort of the seed for this story, how it came to you? I love hearing these stories.
Yeah. So actually my sister and brother-in-law worked search and rescue in Yosemite for 5 years. And they just always had these like insane stories of rescues that they'd been on. And so it had long been in my head, and they recently moved back to that area. So it had long been in my head to maybe set something there. And then 2 summers ago, Gabby Petito disappeared in Jackson Hole in Grand Teton National Park, where I've spent a lot of time, but have also set several books. And before we knew what had happened to her, it just sort of sparked this cascade of ideas. It's not her story, but I would say it's kind of what I wish her story had been. If when you've read it, that makes sense, I think.
Yes, it does.
And obviously it's a terrible story, but I thought it was so interesting to really have something where the setting is like a character in the book. And Yosemite is so overwhelming of a place and so iconic. And to have access to my sister and brother-in-law and that sort of background stuff. And then I've now spent quite a bit of time in Mammoth, where they live, which is just outside the park and in the park. So it's actually like in situ when I was writing this book, which I've never done before with a book that I've set somewhere I don't live. So not that I've actually set any books where I live really, but anyway, so that's a different conversation. But so that was the germ of it. And then, it went from there.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, so I grew up in Northern California. So, I'm very familiar with Yosemite, of course. And I thought, there was so much authenticity. I think people who haven't visited national parks or haven't spent a long time inside the park, right, rather than sort of on the main roads that you travel through the park, don't realize just how much acreage there is. You can fly a helicopter, but it's like there's trees and it really is. And that's what makes it these parks such jewels. But when you get lost in them, right?
They're so huge. And Yosemite is enormous. And it has, I chose to set the book in the Tuolumne Meadows part of Yosemite, which is closer to where my sister lives and where I spent more time, and is a smaller, sort of more self-contained area than the valley floor, which is the famous part where there's El Capitan and Half Dome and, all the movies are all set there. And, but yeah, like it's just trees and lakes and granite. And if you get off the trail, like, see you later, because you can just and walk for miles. And for sure, there's these search and rescue squads, which are semi-volunteer. They only get paid if they actually go on a rescue, which is a bit weird. And,
Right.
And then there's the permanent park staff, but there's way less people policing these areas and there for safety than you'd think, given how many visitors come in. And I mean, you live near another great national park, which Yellowstone's also vast, and I've been there a bunch of times too. But I think people think about like, oh, the path, like the concrete path into the wilderness, and then 1 mile later, the concrete path disappears, and you're kind of on your own,
Right. And I think it's interesting, and we were in Arizona this March, and we were just hiking Tom's Thumb, I think is what it's called, out, which is in outside Scottsdale. And basically somebody had to climb up. They tried to land a helicopter. They had to rescue somebody. And the thing that is so true of these situations is people do, and that's not even a big hike, but people go in completely unprepared, right? I mean, they don't have the water, the food, a map, a compass, they're really, and, let alone sort of like gear, if the weather changes, which in all of these places, it does in a heartbeat. And I think, and it puts, they put themselves in these precarious situations, I think, ignorantly, but often unknowingly. But then they also put all these search and rescue people in bad positions, which, you do that in the book and show us. And the park is an incredible character in the book, and it is like this is what's fun. Is for me, it was fun because I spent some time there. But I think no matter who you are, being in that park with them is it's really fun, and it gives you a sense for just we're used to these gritty city type suspense novels, but boy, the wilderness is a wild and crazy place. So
and there's a bear, and
yes. There are bears. There are actual
there's lots of bears. Well, and I think also, it really struck me for the first time a difference between Canada and the US. And, I grew up hiking actually in the Adirondacks in upstate New York. And it's much more, I'd say, in the Canadian model of wilderness. But the first time that I went to that national park in Utah,
Canyon or Bryce.
I've been to Bryce. Similar, but anyway, one of them.
Yes.
And it was really, what I thought was so interesting is that these paved paths where I was like, it's just far enough for someone to get into trouble, because they're on a sidewalk, but it's, they've never hiked, they're out of shape, it's hot as hell, they don't have water, and unfortunately, many rescues that my sister and brother-in-law went on were literally littering out people who just never should have gone in there in the first place.
Right.
And that's a crazy experience, and putting their own lives at risk, and then I think people also, they were really on the team before cell phones were ubiquitous, but I'm sure now they must get called all the time, like, hey, I need some water up on, it's like, no, that's not what they're here for.
Right. Well, and still to this day, at least in Yellowstone, a lot of places are still, you get into a dead spot, you've got no cell phone. So if you think that you're taking your cell phone on your long hike and that's going to be your savior, well, then you're going to be sadly disappointed. And there's so many factors, and I think people underestimate those, their own strength. They overestimate their own strength, and they underestimate the elements in real ways. And I'm curious about your your sister and brother-in-law. Have you been out there when they've been rescuing to get to see what it's like?
No, I haven't done that, but what I did do is I watched like every climbing movie documentary that exists in a really compressed time. So, I watched Free Solo, I watched the Dawn Wall, I watched The Alpinist, and 4 or 5 other ones that, people haven't saying 16 Summits. And I've long been a fan of books about Everest climbs, and I've seen like every single movie about all the disasters on Everest. So I myself climbed the Grand Teton now several years ago. And that was its own sort of harrowing experience. So,
Yeah.
so I haven't seen them do a rescue, but I've definitely seen people be rescued, and they're rock climbers as well. And I suck at rock climbing, but and any
But you
area,
like it. You're out there and yeah.
well, it's fun to watch, though it's really nerve-wracking. I am afraid of heights, one of the reasons why I'm bad at rock climbing, and I get like sympathetic vertigo, like,
Oh.
I couldn't watch Free Solo for years because even though I knew he lived, I was still like, I can't
Yeah.
watch
Fair.
this movie,
Totally fair. I totally get it. So let's talk about Cassie, the main character of the story, because one of the things I think is super interesting and done really well in the book, among many things, is the fact that she's such a different person, right? She leaving her life in New York and then coming to Yosemite. She's really two people, and I actually think that's something that maybe we all have a little bit, like when we're in different places. So I wanted you to talk about your inspiration for her, and also sort of like the way in which maybe we all change depending on sort of our where we are.
Yeah, well, I've long sort of observed that, and even in myself, like if you go suddenly end up with the people you were friends with in high school, like suddenly you're acting like you did when you were 16 years old, then it's like, why am I being like this? But it's situational, right? And yeah, I mean, I think in my mind, Cassie is someone who she obviously runs away from her problems, and there's that expression that everywhere you go, there you are. But I don't actually think that's true for her necessarily, because like she's just not a long-term planner. She's just a reactor. And so she had these bad things happen to her in her first summer in search and rescue. This traumatic, this couple gets lost, and this girl dies, and she blames herself, and so she starts to run away, and then she gets involved with a man, and she just slips into his life basically, and just leaves her own life behind until she can't anymore. And then when she needs to leave that situation, the only thing she can think of is, oh, I'll just go back and do the thing I used to do.
Right.
And I think that's just kind of like her limited scope on life, and the way that she's just very reactive. So I think sometimes I really actively try not to put myself in books, and I think sometimes I figure out my characters by being like, what's the opposite of what I would do?
Right.
And that's how, and then I know it's not me, because there's zero chance that I would do anything that Cassie does in this book. So and the other thing that was fun was I hadn't written so Cassie's 30, and I hadn't written someone who was that young in a thriller in a long time. And so that was getting into that headspace too, where it's so different than when you're in your 20s, when you're in your 30s, when you're in your 40s. These are all such different places in life, right? And so going back to that, when you were late 20s, early 30s, you just made stupid decisions because it just didn't feel like they had consequences.
Right. Of course. That's so true.
Right?
And and speaking of sort of her transition, there's another sort of thing that shows up in the book is sort of the idea of abuse, and how people are affected by it so differently, right? And the responses to it are so different. And I thought that was, it seems like something you were exploring as you're writing this book. And I'd love to hear, more about, what that interests you.
I think it's so easy to judge those situations from the outside, and whenever I get into those conversations, I'm always like, well, it's not like the guy slaps you in the first date, right? That's not what happens, because obviously everyone would turn around and walk out if that happened. So, but there are people who tend to get pulled into these situations over and over again, and it's not their fault. A friend of mine actually, I thought, described it really well. It's that you get used to being badly treated, and so when you get back into a situation like that, it feels familiar.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, this is comfortable because I know what this is. And I think that that's part of it. I think that people who are abusive are very good at figuring out who they can do that to and get away with it. But there's also these seductions that happen, and so I think that I wanted to explore sort of the various facets again, because like the inspiration for this was Gabby, and Gabby was abused, and you look at her and you're like, you're this beautiful girl who is 20 years old or whatever. Like, how did this happen? And how did the cops like fall for this guy? And all these things that happened that contributed to her death, and the way the family must have looked the other way, and all that stuff too, right? And so I think that there's just so many levels of that, many more levels than we think. And I've had several friends get out of bad marriages, and not necessarily physically abusive, but it's like, wow, there's just like so much more abuse than you think there is, and people don't talk about it, even to their because you talk about it, you make it real.
And I think there's so much shame in it. There's so much shame. We feel so much shame for like letting ourselves be treated badly, sticking around. Yeah, I think that's true in relationships where there's, emotional or physical abuse, but also infidelities and, lying and deceit, like a million reasons why we immediately feel like we're to blame. And I think I know it happens to men and there's no question, but I think it's really much more of a woman scenario. It happens more frequently to women.
100%. And I mean, and women are not believed too, right? And so, if a guy said, I was walking down the street and someone punched me in the face, they wouldn't be like, well, why are you making that up? Like that, right? That guy would get arrested, and that would be the end of that. And so, there's so many shocking statistics, but one of them that really sticks with me is that women who claim abuse and divorce lose the custody of their children. Like, they say that their child has been abused, or that they were abused and their husband was abusive. Not only are they not believed, they tend to lose custody of their kids.
Right.
And
so means you're putting the
children over to the abuser. Like that, it's so screwed up, but like the evidence is there for that. And so, so it's just crazy. And again, if we take Gabby Petito as an example, like somebody called the cops because they saw him hit her. There's an eyewitness to this event. She has marks on her face. She immediately goes into abuser protective mode, and he's a sociopath. So he's like, all good here. He's not emotional. He's not upset. Of course he isn't. That's the proof that he's the abuser. If he had been hit for real, then he'd be upset too. But he's not upset. He's perfectly fine. And what do? They put, like, yes, they separate them, but basically they're like going to file charges against her, They did the opposite of everything that they're supposed to do. And I don't know, why are we so programmed in society to believe men? When of course men perpetrate 90% of the violence. I
know, right?
In this scenario, is it that she hit him and she weighs 90 pounds, or he hit her? Which one's more like? Well, it's 90-10. That's
right. It is. God, it is. That is. I know. It does really shock me to hear. I mean, of course, it's it's just, it is so shocking, and it is still so prevalent. And I would have thought, that it's at some point we would have sort of figured this stuff out, but we clearly have not. And I love the fact that one of the themes in this book is about that. And it's not like we're reading the book and being hammered over the head with the messages. The fun thing about thrillers, I think, is it's a way to explore the really dark realities for a lot of people in a way that we hope, right, is just fun and entertaining, primarily, because that's our job, but also that makes people think like, wow, this is, this looked like one thing, people, misinterpreted it, and look what happened, kind of stuff. So another fun thing that you do in the book is some mothers, right? There's mothers in the book. And I think, of course, I am a mother. We have mothers.
Everyone has a mother.
Everyone has a mother. And it is very much like the sort of different ways in which our mothers, impact our lives, right? And it's always the mother's always to blame too. That's sort of the other fun, like hilarious. We're always the ones that like we messed up our kids, for whatever reason we we do that. So but I love that, but I love that. I love that those relationships are so different, right? Like, Cassie's mother and she have a very estranged relationship. Petal's mother is not in her life at all. And Jada really works to please her mother. There's these three women whose mother relationships are really different, which I think is a really, interesting thing that you explored there. So, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we're writing thrillers, right? So it's not all going to be happy-go-lucky, and you came from such a nice family,
Right.
I remember in edits, so Cassie hasn't seen her mother in 10 years, and obviously her mother's not happy about this, and she goes to have lunch with her, and they get into it because, only your family can drive you from 0 to crazy in like 10.2 seconds, right? And
Totally.
so, and I remember, one of my editors was like, well, this seems like a lot in this conversation. And I'm like, I've toned this down actually.
Yeah.
Like, this could have gone like even bigger than this, I feel like. And I just think it's so interesting those early relationships, I just think like shape your whole worldview about things. And so if, to take Cassie for an example, where her dad basically abandoned them when her mom was pregnant and was barely in her life, and it's not that she's close to her dad, but she somehow has, I guess, more forgiveness for her dad because he just did the one injury where she was left with the mom who's obviously broken by being abandoned and being a young mom and just trying to do her best, but that she was still in that line of fire.
Right. Right. Which is interesting, actually, there in itself. It's like, why, and this is not a unique story. I think it's absolutely authentic, is that we can forgive the guy, the sort of distant dad who didn't do anything because, like you said, he just abandoned us once versus, feeling like the mother abandons us every time she says something mean or, or hurtful,
she takes out her hurt on you because you're the only one that's there and you're the reminder of the bad thing that happened to her.
Right.
Yeah. And then I think, for Petal, whose mom took off when she was a kid and left her in a shitty situation, she kind of understands. She's like, yeah, I would get out of here too if I could, and she's not mad at her mom. Like, she's just like, yeah, good on you, just send me a postcard, let me figure out where you are. And I think, again, it's kind of the flip side of Cassie. I do like to sometimes plot people who are kind of the inside out of one another.
Of course,
because Cassie really doesn't give a crap about her dad and isn't ever looking for him. And whereas like Petal's whole personality is shaped around like, I'm going to go now I'm a grown up, so I'm going to go find her, but not to be mad at her. She just wants to have a relationship with her. So yeah, and Jada and her mom, I mean, that's super complicated, and I don't want to give anything away. But yeah, you know what? Jada also was like a single mom, and I think, or was a product of a single mom, and I think that like you can have an amazing family with a single parent home, but there's just so many more obstacles.
Of course, yeah.
To that situation. And I think it marks people. And I think that, if I take Jada as an example, I think that she saw an intact family and she was like attracted to her boyfriend, not just him, but everything that he represented.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And
I think
it's like a fairy tale of like, oh, that's what a family is supposed to be like.
Right.
Not
Which absolutely we do, right? We do, of course, pick people for what we think they will provide us that we're missing.
Yes.
Absolutely. And to that point, like one of the things I really also love about the book is sort of the idea about this family we create, right? Because especially like in intense situations like the team at Search and Rescue, and I know this from I have lots of friends who worked many years in Yellowstone before sort of settling into our town and having more less high risk jobs. But there's a real sense of that in this book too, which is really fun, right? Because I think that's true for all of us. If we have family, it's one thing, but in addition, we do create a family from the people that are around us.
Agree. Like found family, I think is a big thing. And I also, I didn't work in Search and Rescue, but I went to the same summer camp for 9 years. And those proximity, heightened stakes time periods in our life that you know, and I think about what the kids who had been at camp for 2 weeks were leaving like bawling.
Of course. Yeah. Oh,
Tears,
I remember crying after 2 weeks. Absolutely.
right, right. And, you know, and the adults too, you know, and so, and I think with fear, that just, and you have to rely on these people too, right? It's because when you're out on a rescue, it's that other person needs to be doing their job so you don't die trying to save someone else.
Right.
So it's all those definitely those heightened stakes, but it's also a bunch of people that, like, I think, you know, Cassie really has trouble trusting people or letting her guard down. And,
Yeah.
you know, I think the other personalities on the team are like pretty laid back and just want to be her friend. And she's just like, where's the angle? What do you want from me?
Right.
You know? And
Right.
it's like, chill out, Kathy, like take it for what it is. But
But that's her past damage talking, right? That's just, you know, so I think it really makes the, you know, that's again, it feels very real to me that is, she responds that way, and that it is hard for some of us to, you know, or for people to trust again once they've been burned. And I think that's a really sort of a natural response. So, and the whole
sure.
thing, you know, it's such a fun story. You know, of course, I mean, this is, you know, I say that all, you know, digging into all these bits and pulling it apart, but it is really a fast paced, you know, page turner. I think but what's amazing about the way you do it, I think, and super admirable, is that on top of that, there's all these wonderful layers that so it's the kind of book you read in a night. So be prepared, like start early or plan to not get very much sleep. But then, you know, but then it sticks with you because there's these things that are universal and are, you know, this is not just a sort of superficial story. There's a lot of stuff that happens to these characters that is real and traumatic, and, you know, little T, big T, you know, trauma's trauma and all that. So it's super well done and so fun. I want you to talk to us about the fact that you're not only like an incredible thriller writer, you have a rom-com coming out, and I think that's so amazing. So tell us a little bit about that book, which is coming out.
It came out. Yeah, it came out.
Sorry. Okay, yeah.
No, it's
Tell
okay.
us about it.
Yeah, so it's called Hazel Fine Sings Along. And I wrote it under a pseudonym, Katie Wicks. And it's about a woman in a singing competition, like American Idol meets The Voice. And she sort of feels like it's her last chance to get the career that she wants. But, you know, this is probably my thriller writer talking. She has a secret. And if the secret comes out, you know, it could jeopardize her future. And of course, it's a rom-com. So there's a man. There's a happy. But it's funny actually, because originally in Have You Seen Her, the ending was a lot happier. And my editor, who knew I was writing this rom-com, was like, I think your rom-com is infecting
Fair,
the ending of this book. Like, and I'm like, no, you're right. I need to up the menace at the end of the book for sure. So yeah, I mean, you know, I practiced law for, as you said at the top, for a very long time. And I published a book a year while I was practicing law. And I stopped practicing near the end of 2020 for various reasons. But I was like, okay, well, I have way more time on my hands now, obviously. Writing. And, you know, we've been talking about some of the dark themes in the book. Like, you know, you write thrillers, like those are a dark place to be in. And even if my thrillers, I don't actually consider that dark in terms of on the page, there's not a lot of violence.
No,
nothing happens to children. You know, I don't do things like that. But like I could think of much, much darker books than mine, but it is still a dark to live when you're writing those. And so I just wanted to write something fun.
Yeah.
Like, just light and fun, and that where I could make myself laugh while I was writing it, and hopefully other people. And so yeah, that's been super fun. I actually have a second one coming out next year called Chloe Baker's Lost Date. And yeah, it's, you know, I actually started off career writing. Well, I was Nick Hornby, but they thought I was writing chick lit. I don't know. Nobody likes shoes or clothing in my books, but you know, but that is what I started off writing, is romantic comedies, and with a little bit of heft to them. I think that's just sort of the way that I write. And so, and I stopped writing those for various reasons, but also the market changes. And it was so nice to see like suddenly people are reading Emily Henry and Carly Fortune.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's come back into I don't even want to say fashion because I think there was always a market, but it's come back into like publishing fashion.
Yeah. Right.
Give these books a chance, and so it's been fun to dip my toe into that. And then I'm sure we'll get, whatever, but I'm precipitating a question. My next project is actually kind of marrying the two in a way.
Interesting. Tell
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. So I sold a funny mystery series.
You are busy.
I'm busy. I'm too busy. But yeah. So the first of those, the first book is called Every Time I Go on Vacation, Someone Dies.
Cute.
And yeah, and it's about a woman who has a long-running mystery series, and the protagonist is based on a real person, and she's just sick of him. And they're on the 10th anniversary tour in Italy, and she wants to kill him in the next book. And she's literally plotting his death, and he comes up to her and he's like, someone's trying to kill me. And so they're on tour with a bunch of other mystery writers, and so it's just super fun to write it.
That is so fun.
Yeah, super fun. And I need to start writing book 2. So I've never done a series before. Have you done
God. I did almost all series. I've had
Yeah.
3 different series and then 4 standalones. So I'm a series writer. Of course, none of my books started as a series. Every book I wrote as a standalone, and then they were like, oh, we want this to be a series, and then I would sort of go back and massage parts of it. It is fun though. It's fun to go back to the same people. Like, it's kind of like visiting old friends. And I still like, I the book that came out this week was the 3rd book at the end of the series that I was working on. And I'm like, I have another book I want to write in the Annabelle Schwartzman series, which has been done for a while. So we'll see. But I'm not as good as I'm clearly not as good as you are about writing more than 1 book a year. I tend to be like, oh, well, it seems like enough for me. So, but I love.
I mean, I my joke always was like, if I got paid more, I'd write less. So,
Yes,
I want to go back to writing 1 book a year. Let's be clear.
Yes.
But and that is the plan going forward. But the fun thing about it, or I think this was always planned as a series, and so that meant me approaching my main character in particular in a very different way. And for me, I always knew a book was finished when I didn't think about these people anymore. I had no questions about them. I was like, other authors talk about missing their characters. I've never missed a single person that I've ever written, ever. I give them 0 thought once the book is over. Sometimes now I do book clubs for books that are a couple years old. I'm like, oh yeah, what's that person called again?
Yeah, right. Well, that's hard to keep track of for sure. But that's a good. But now you're thinking about.
Well, now, yeah. So now I have to like live in it, and then on top of it, which is like the super exciting news, is I did sell it is also in development for TV, and I'm writing the pilot, and
so fun.
I know. So that's a whole different thing too, where it's like adapting the story and I mean, I signed the contract literally the day before the writer's strike started. So I'm on strike.
Yes, good for you.
Yeah. But it is thinking about, it's interesting to break your own story.
Yeah.
So close after I finished writing it.
Right.
And I had to like pitch my version of the TV show. And I was saying to my manager, I'm like, I have to go pitch for a job I already have on a project I've already sold.
Right.
It's a weird way of going about it. But anyway, they liked my pitch and they said yes to my pitch, and then we went on strike. So
well, that's still super exciting. And I do hope the strike is, for so many reasons, ending soon, because God, a lot of people that's a really hard situation to be in. So so now is the mystery out this year?
Next year. Yeah.
Okay.
Next.
Yeah. You're gonna have a lot of stuff out. It sounds like you're gonna be like
2-3 books a year. But again, like the idea is to then go down to.
Yes, of course.
Like I have 2 books this year. I'll have 2 books next year. But the idea is to like just be doing the one book.
Yeah, eventually just exactly. One book a year.
Yeah. And but again, like I'm happy to do those things. And what's been so fun to write vacation is that it's funny and it's just fun to write. Like I would literally sit in this office and be laughing
Right.
with myself, but to be able to wrap that around like a really good, hopefully good mystery that people can't figure out on the first page.
Right.
Which is always the goal, obviously.
Yes. People, so clever.
And there's some romance. And so it's like I'm kind of like melding all the threads.
It sounds so fun. Well, and the first book is called, you just every time I go on vacation,
I can't even say every time I go on vacation, someone dies.
I love it. That's so fun. Okay, well, show us the beautiful cover for this book, because the focus on is this, and that book is coming out
June 27th.
June 27th, and our show is airing on June 29th. So that means as you're listening to this, have you seen ours available? And you can also go find, how do you spell Wicks for your pseudonym?
Wicks.
That would make sense. So Katie Wicks.
Hazel Fine sings along. Yeah.
Hazel Fine sings along. So lots of books to check out from Catherine, and so exciting. I love your book. Thank you for being here with us today to share all your incredible news. That is just fabulous.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And congrats on your book.
Thank you so much. This has been Killer Women with Catherine McKenzie, and we will see you next time. Bye.